For many people, trains on their own are a fascinating spectacle. Several hundred tons of metal thundering along at high speeds can bring out the child in all of us. You know what else brings out the child in all of us? The circus! But does it make sense to combine the two? Surprisingly, yes. By 1872, P.T. Barnum's great travelling museum, menagerie, caravan and hippodrome, later shortened to the P.T. Barnum Circus, was struggling to get around. The circus had acquired so many acts and assets it was becoming difficult to tour the US. The show mostly travelled by road, but occasionally paid local railroads to transport various, heavier assets short distances. However, the circus had grown so much that the managers decided that they would only perform at large venues, and due to the amount of equipment, animals, performers and staff they had, they felt the only way to effectively transport them all was by train. Railroads at the time connected every major city in the US, could haul large amounts of heavy goods, and were one of the fastest ways of getting from A to B, so it was the perfect way for the circus to travel. Flat cars were purchased from the Pennsylvania Railroad, and managers William Cameron Koo and Dan Costello developed a system of ropes, pulleys and ramps to help load and unload the cars. Halfway through its first season of its rail haul tour, it was found the stock purchased from the Pennsylvania was in very poor condition and proving to be hazardous, leading the managers to order 60 brand new cars for the circus. This included carriages for transporting performers and staff, livestock cars for transporting the animals tailored to the needs of said animals, and boxcars and flatbeds for transporting various supplies, wagons and the tents. The only thing the circus didn't own was a locomotive, relying on the railroads they travelled on to provide an engine to tow their train. After becoming the Barnum and Bailey Circus, in 1897, it was decided the show would go on tour in Europe. The problem was the American-built rolling stock was too big for European railways, and so a fleet of custom cars had to be built for the 5-year tour. 67 cars were ordered and built by the Phoenix Works of Stoke-on-Trent in England. The main circus train was made up of 66 cars, 7 sleeping cars for performers and staff, a saloon car for Mr. Bailey, the manager, 3 elephant cars, 1 camel car, a lead stock car, a double-decker car, 16 stock cars, 35 flatbeds and 1 baggage car. Some of the cars, such as the elephant car, had to be fitted with smaller wheels to help keep the floor lower to the ground in order to make enough space for the animals. A special advertising car was built and attached to various local trains. This car was equipped with a small office and the facilities required to make paste for putting up posters, running a few weeks ahead of the circus to spread word of its arrival. Despite being built in England, these cars were designed to be American in appearance to fit with the American nature of the show. Barnum and Bailey arrived in England in May 1898, but the last car wasn't completed until that July. Just like in America, the circus relied on the railways to supply the engines that would transport them. The circus had to be split up into 3 separate trains during transport, with each being pulled by 2 goods engines. Once the train was fully assembled, the circus toured Britain for 2 seasons before being shipped to Germany in 1900, where it went on to tour Austria, Hungary, Croatia, modern-day Czech Republic, modern-day Poland, Holland, Belgium, France and Switzerland before finally returning to New York in 1902. The British circus cars were left behind, with 50 being reused by Buffalo Bill Cody's Wild West show between 1903 and 1906 during their European tour. Afterwards, most of the cars were scrapped, with a handful ending up transporting miners at the Chatterley-Whitfield Colliery. Only 1 sleeper car remains, currently preserved at the National Museum in Cardiff. The Ringling Brothers Circus also ended up investing in their own railroad rolling stock, and so when they bought out the Barnum and Bailey Circus, they had more equipment than they knew what to do with. The newly formed Ringling Bros and Barnum and Bailey Circus eventually split its show into 2, forming the Red Tour Tour and the Blue Tour. Both tours travelled for 2 years at a time, with the Red Tours starting on odd-numbered years and the Blue Tours starting on even-numbered years. The Ringling Bros and Barnum and Bailey weren't the only travelling circuses to have their own private trains either. Other names include the Walter L. Main Circus, the Greater Norris and Roe Show, the Colbros Circus, the Hagenbeck Wallace Trained Wild Animal Circus, and many, many more. Countries outside of the US also used circus trains too, with many menageries and travelling shows taking to the rails when going on tour. Even to this day, shows like Circus Crone and Circus Roncalli travel from place to place by train, as it's still the best way of getting such a large amount of people and equipment from A to B all together. All that being said, a life on the road is never an easy one, and circus trains were no different. Sleeping quarters were provided for both staff and performers, but they were often far from comfortable. The bigger stars of the show had relatively cozy compartments, sometimes having a third or even half a carriage to themselves. Meanwhile, many of the workers and staff slept in crowded bunks with little space or privacy, some even having to share beds. The lack of ventilation in the cars meant it could get very stuffy very quickly, resulting in some people finding it more comfortable to sleep in the equipment cars instead. It also wasn't a guarantee that the circus would feed its troupe either, as many companies simply told workers to sort themselves out. Other trains did carry dining cars to feed their troops on long trips, but the meals weren't always free. The Ringling Brothers Circus were recorded in the 1990s charging staff $10 a week to live on their train, plus extra for food. Trainers often slept with or in cars close to their animals, as some animals tended to become quite anxious during train journeys. The animal cars were often positioned at the front of the train to provide them with a much smoother ride, but this was still little comfort. Elephants in particular seemed to suffer the most, as their large size left them quite cramped in their boxcars, not to mention how they were often chained to keep them from moving too much. In some cases, the elephants even found themselves being used to load, unload, and shunt around some of the cars the circus used. Many modern circuses have retired elephants from their shows and stopped using them to help load wagons long ago, but the treatment of many other animals is still a point of contention for animal rights activists. There have also been a large number of accidents involving circus trains, from simple derailments to full-on fatal collisions. The most recent incident involving the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey circus train derailing in Florida in 1994. This was mostly due to circuses using older rolling stock that was worn out, poorly maintained, or simply outdated. In the case of the Hammond Circus wreck of 1918, the cars used were very outdated, being built out of wood and lit with oil lamps, proving to be a fatal combination. In recent years, living conditions on circus trains have significantly improved, with the Ringling Brothers train having running water and electricity in every carriage, easier access to animals while on the move for trainers, better ventilation and heating for both crew and animals. The trains were limited to 60 miles an hour and provided with dedicated train masters to ensure everyone's safety, and better drains and flooring in the animal cars to improve hygiene and to make them easier to clean. Despite all this, most sleeping quarters were still cramped, regardless of the modern comforts. In recent years, circuses have lost the massive draw they once had, and one by one, both circuses and circus trains have begun to disappear, with the Ringling Brothers closing their show in 2017, selling off any train cars they could and scrapping any left over. The Greatest Show on Earth returned in 2023, though this time they decided to do away with the train and mostly use road and air to transport their equipment and crew. Fortunately, circus trains haven't disappeared completely. As I said earlier, German groups Circus Crone and Circus Roncalli both rely on railways to get around, with several other circus companies around the world still using private trains of their own, so they'll still be around for a while yet. But all the same, let us remember the circus trains not only as an iconic piece of railway history, but also for the magical feeling felt by many when an old steamer rolled into town with colourful car after car reading, "The Greatest Show on Earth." Subscribe for more.